final video on carcass joinery. Specifically today, I'm going to be looking at the last group of joints for woodworking applications. Now, there are thousands of different types of joints that are available. Every year when I'm doing research, reading through magazines, or just scrolling through my Facebook feed, I'm seeing all of these creative ways that people have applied different joinery techniques. These videos really only go through the traditional ones, and so I'm going to be sticking with those, but just be aware that there are different joints available out there in the world, and what we've shown to you isn't everything. First one is the rebate joint. You should be very familiar with the rebate joint. Super easy to produce. It's got a fair level of strength, but probably not a super strong joint in most applications because it's sitting at the edge of a timber, edge of a board. So when you close that off, anything pushing in this direction is going to have strength only in one direction. Going the other way, the board just falls off. So rebate joint on its own isn't all that great. Can be reinforced with nails and those sorts of things. But as a simple joint, fairly easy to produce. Main use for rebate joint, widening joints, framing joints, chairs, boxes, and all sorts of carcass construction as well. This one here, the scribe joint. I'll be honest with you, you have probably never actually seen this joint before, but now that I've told you about it, you should be able to go and find one in your house. Not all houses. I mean, I'm looking in the background of my video, and I can see I definitely don't have them. But this is mainly used in your skirting boards and architraves. So if we're looking over at the timber there running around the door frame, where it joins at the ground, that would be the skirting boards. Where those skirting boards meet at corners is where you're most likely going to come across a scribe joint. Now, problem here. You can produce the scribe joint using a router bit if you've got the exact router bit that matches the profile of the board you're working with. Now, I'm going to point out here, that bottom board you see is a fairly standard pre-molded bit of timber that you can buy from the hardware store. Very commonly got a shape like that. What's not common then is when you're trying to get a piece of timber to line up to that, you have to actually scribe that funny little profile across the side and then cope it off. Now, coping it off, getting a coping saw and actually cutting along that curve so it fits nice and snug up against that custom shape. Now, you're doing this by hand. You would mark it with a pencil and then cut it with a coping saw. Can be very challenging to get it absolutely perfect. But have a look around your house, check out your skirting, particularly if you've got any sorts of profiles. Even if you've got the plain bullnose skirting profile, you're probably going to be able to find yourself some scribe joints or coped joints, as they're commonly called as well. Other applications in the workshop, you're probably not really going to come across them all that much. But just a heads up, it is a joint that does exist out there. Box joints, finger joints, box finger joints, pin joints, box pin joints. Lots of different names for this one. Effectively, the way that it works, you can see you've got two pieces. You cut out, so you've got little fingers like that, and then you alternate them on, sorry, I'm struggling with my coordination here. You alternate them so that they actually fit together to make your corner joint. Now, these are quite easy to mark out because they're just plain square or rectangle shapes. If you've got a really tight fit, so if you cut them properly, mark them properly, and piece them together and they're really snug, very strong joint, fantastic joint. You can increase the strength by putting a nail in it if you need to. Although I think if you've done a good enough job of cutting these, you shouldn't really need to do that. They're not as strong as a dovetail. Dovetail I'll come across shortly, but they're also not really suited to drawer fronts. Now, if you think about a drawer, imagine that this piece here on the left is the drawer and there's a handle in the middle. If that's closed together and then I pull the handle, it just comes straight off. So it's actually not really suited for a drawer front application. However, there are plenty of times that it gets used for drawers, particularly if it gets done in a really tight fit, if it's glued really well, if it's reinforced with a nail. All of those sorts of things mean it can be used for a drawer. But if you've got a super heavy draw front, maybe it hasn't got draw runners, it's one of those old traditional drawers just sitting in a housing, I'd really avoid using the box or the pin joint for this, because you're very likely to have that front come off, or the back come off as well, because they work in a set of 4. Can be used for all sorts of box construction, all sorts of carcass construction. I could imagine this one being used in a really decorative way in an application like a jewelry box, for example. Then we've got the dovetail. Now, the dovetail looks very similar to the box joint. However, it's got this wonderful angle shape at the end that creates this sort of trapezium. Now, that trapezium is mimicked from the dove's tail. The bird, the dove, has a nice fanned out tail, and that's where it gets its name from. Now, because it's got this fanned out shape, when you slot it into that horizontal piece, you can see that it slots in really easy, fantastically. But this piece here, if you tried to pull it up, the way that the fan works is actually holding it in position and means that it can't pull off without bringing the rest of the project with it. It's for this exact reason that the dovetail joint is perfectly suited to a drawer. Now, when you use it for a drawer, it's really important that you actually get the dovetails around the right way. So this piece here that has the cut out, okay, the cutout bit, is what you would use for the back and for the front of your drawer. This piece here that actually has the dovetails sticking out of them, they would be the pieces that you would use on the sides of the drawer. If you do it the other way around, just going to pop straight off and wouldn't be very effective there. Now, these are considered to be a highly challenging joint, and as a result, people often leave them on display as a feature. So they'll actually be purposefully left on show in a finished product rather than trying to be hidden away or tucked away inside the project. Very commonly used for drawer construction, can be used for box construction, can be used for other carcass construction. Now, the other thing I'll mention here is, just like all the demonstration images I've got here, this is a single dovetail on a joint. In a drawer application, you might have 3, 5, 7 dovetails all lined up next to each other so that you have a huge amount of strength and a huge amount of technical difficulty. But if you produce it, it looks absolutely superb. Now, there are plenty of jigs available for dovetails and router bits that are designed specifically for dovetails as well. So you put those two things together, you can get the perfect dovetail. But if you're using a jig, it's not as challenging anymore. So if we're thinking about that degree of difficulty, it's not as high as if you had to cut it by hand. But definitely something worth considering. If you're doing a drawer, I should say a dovetail. Next up is a housing joint. We've been through a housing joint before. It's so similar to a rebate joint. Such a simple joint, can be produced with a single router. You plunge it down, run it along a straight edge, and you get your housing. Then your solid piece of timber then just slots in because you've cut the housing to the thickness of the next board. Now, where is this one used? All the time. Absolutely all the time in shelves. Now, if you open your kitchen cupboards and you've got shelves that you can take the pins out of the side and move up and move down, that's not a housing joint. But if you've got an entertainment unit under your TV and it has a shelf that doesn't move, very likely that that's actually been housed in because of the amount of strength that it provides to the overall project. There is only one way to improve the strength of the overall presentation of a housing joint, not the strength, the presentation, and that's to try and hide it. Now, if you have a look, when this piece falls down here, you're going to have this very visible joint in the front, and that sort of highlights that you've used a very quick and very simple joint. Now, the housing joint, very quick, very simple, highly strength, but quick and simple. So if we go across to the second joint here, also a housing joint, but this is called a stopped housing joint because it's housed, but at the front it's been stopped, notches out, and actually looks very, very neat then. So you might be looking at your entertainment unit thinking, nah, there's no way this is a housing joint because I can't see the cut-ins. Have a look from the back. If you see the cut-ins at the back but not at the front, then you know you've just witnessed a stopped housing joint, which is housing joint that doesn't go the whole way through the board. Okay. Disadvantage of doing the stopped housing joint, it's a little bit more technical because when you're cutting with a route of the housing, it has a circular profile. So just down here, you get a curve as opposed to that nice neat square edge. And so the way that you work around that is you use a chisel to square it off. And then you just slot your piece in. Very quick, very simple. Look, that's the end of all of our joint-based videos. We're now moving back into the Folio Explain series on design development. So that'll be the next video you've got coming up, which sort of runs you through the process of doing all of those sketches for your project and how the sketches progressively develop over time. Hope these have been really helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing what you produce in the workshop. Thanks very much.